What is up, you awesome kisters? It is CistReactZ. Before this video starts off, guys, gotta let you guys know that there is a new CistReactZ shirt that is on Teespring right now. Make sure you guys go check it out. Click the link in the description to get 40% off on your purchase. So yeah, and it is made by Carson V from Twitter, so make sure you guys follow him if you had one. Peace out.
Keep it on the level. Keep it on the level. I'm climbing up the. Keep it on the level. Keep it on the level.
What is up, you awesome kisters? It is CistReactZ, guys, and welcome back to the Twisted Ones Chapter 3. So yeah, guys, let's get straight into this. So yeah, I'm reading, this is like the third chapter I read on the day of release on, Twisted Ones. So, give me a break. It's like 4 a.m. My reading's gonna be weird. Anyway, so yeah, Charlie, are you okay? What? Charlie looked at John. She realized she pulled her feet up on the chair and was hugging her knees to her chest. She sat back, her shoes back on the floor. John gave her a concerned look. "I'm fine," she whispered, and gestured to the screen. John put a hand on her forearm. "Are you sure you're okay?" Charlie stared straight ahead. Now there were people running. Zombies lurking after them. Oh yeah, they're watching a zombie movie. That doesn't make any sense, Charlie muttered, mostly to herself. "What?" Charlie didn't move. Repeated to herself. "It doesn't make any sense. Zombies don't make sense. If they're dead, their central nervous system is shot. They can't do any of this if they're Is she trying to connect this to the murder? Man, if their functioning central nervous system... If there's functioning central nervous system, which has decayed to the point that movement and thought are possible, but severely hindered, fine. It makes them violent, fine. But why would they want to eat brains? It doesn't make sense. That man wouldn't have been able to walk on his own. In his suit oversized, he didn't want to walk into that field. The suit did. The animatronic was carrying him inside. It walked to that field on its own accord. What kind of cracked up idea is... You know what? It's not even a cracked up idea. You know? It's probably right. Maybe it's symbolic. And John suggested, "Yeah! You don't even know the half of it," John suggested, eager to engage, however odd the conversation. "You know, like the idea that you eat your enemy's heart to gain their power? Maybe the zombie eats the enemy's brain to gain its central nervous system?" He glanced at Charlie, but she was only half listening. "Okay," she said. She was irritated by the movie. Now she was irritated by the conversation she herself had introduced. "I'll be right back," she told John. You volunteered to go on this date, but okay. And she ran back, she told John, and got up waiting for him to respond. Without waiting for him to respond, she made her way out of the row, through the lobby, out to the door on the sidewalk. She took a deep breath, and it felt intense relief at the wash of fresh air. "Dreams about being trapped are common," she reminded herself. She looked up where when they began. They were only slightly less common than dreams of showing up to a class naked, plummeting from a great height, or having your teeth all suddenly fall out. But this didn't feel like a dream. Charlie jostled her thoughts back to the present, where even the crime scene of a gruesome murder seemed like a safer place to them. Sorry, making sure I was recording. There must be tracks. He didn't walk there himself. There must be some type of clue what carried him to the field, or it could be from. Charlie shivered, went back inside to the building. "John's gonna think I'm nuts." She arrived at this... Why do you care about him now? She arrived at the swinging theater doors and stopped. She couldn't do it. She had to know. There was a young man at the concession stand, and she asked him if the place had a payphone. He pointed silently to his right, and Charlie went, fishing in her pocket for a quarter, and for Chief Burke's card. She dialed carefully, pausing between the numbers to check the guard again, as if writing might have changed since she looked. Clay Burke answered on the third ring. "Burke." "Clay, it's Charlie." "Charlie, what's wrong?" He was instantly alert. Charlie could picture him leaping to his feet, ready to run. "Yeah, nothing, I'm fine," she assured him. "Nothing, I'm fine," she assured him. Oh, Burke let the silence stretch between them, and Charlie finally broke in. is there anything else you can tell me? I know it's confidential, but you brought me in this far. Please, if there's anything else you know, anything else you found, anything you know about the man, the victim. No. I mean, I'll let you know if we find anything. Okay, thanks. I'll be in touch. Okay, Charlie hung up the phone before he could say goodbye. I don't believe you, she said to the phone on the wall. I know, he's lying. Like guys, I have a suspicion that Clay's lying. Back to the theater, her eyes took a moment to adjust as she inched along the back row toward her seat, careful not to make noise. John looked up at her with a smile as she sat down, but didn't say anything. Charlie smiled back with a grim determination and settled back into her seat, then scooted over until her shoulder was pressed against his. From behind her head, he heard him make a surprised noise, and then he shifted, putting his arm back around her shoulders. He gripped her tightly for a moment, halfway to a hug. Charlie leaned in a little, unsure how to reciprocate. What if someone put him in a costume like some wind-up death trap, stuck him inside the thing, then set it walking until the spring locks went off? But who would even know how to do that? Why would somebody do that? It would be David. Maybe David's possessing the suits. He's not even alive. We know that. I don't know, man. Oh, it could be the Phantom animatronics, too. Okay, let me stop. Did I miss anything? Charlie asked. Though she hadn't paid any attention to the first half of the movie anyway, it was daytime on screen. It looked like there were more people holed up in some sort of bunker. Charlie couldn't remember which of them had been the original character. She wriggled in her seat. John's arm around her relaxed, but now the arm of the seat was digging into her side. He started to move away, but she settled herself again. No, it's okay, she whispered, and his arm circled around her again. Just get on with it. Charlie flustered. John startled. Sorry, I don't want to be too aggressive. No, not on you, Charlie gestured toward the screen. They should be building a minefield around the bunker and wait for them all to blow up. The end. I think that's actually what they'll do in the sequel, but we'll have to wait to watch it for ourselves. He winked. There's another one, she sighed. When the credits started to roll, they gathered their things and headed to the exits. When the rest of the small crowd, not speaking until they got outside on the sidewalk, they stopped. This has been nice, sounding somehow like he meant it, and Charlie laughed, then groaned, covering her face with both hands. This has been awful. This has been the worst date ever. I'm so sorry. Thanks for lying, though. John gave an uncertain smile. It was nice to see you, he said, with cautious levity. It's just, can we go somewhere to talk? John nodded, and Charlie started back toward the campus, with him following behind. The quad was usually empty late at night, or at least mostly empty. There was always someone walking across, some student finishing up late night work in a lab, some couple costumed in a dark corner. Tonight was no different. It was easily enough to find their own dark corner to talk. I guess she's gonna tell him, guys. Charlie sat down under a tree and John copied her, then waited for her to talk as she stared at the gap between the two buildings where you could almost see the woods. Finally, he prompted her. So what's up? Right. She met his eyes. Clay came to see me today. John's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. He took me to see a body. Charlie went on. He had died inside one of the mascot's costumes. John was frowning. She could almost see his thoughts, working through what this meant, why it involved Charlie. That's not all. Clay told me that they found blood in the main dining room at Freddy's. Fake blood. John's head jerked up. You think Dave's alive? Charlie shrugged. Clay didn't come out and say it, but all those scars he had survived. The spring locks with the mascot costume before. But all those scars, he has survived the spring locks of a mascot costume before. He must have known how to escape the building. It didn't look to me like he escaped, John said doubtfully. Yeah, that's what everyone thinks right before he stabs you in the back. Or possesses your mind to do stuff, or possesses a suit. He could have faked it. It would certainly explain the blood. So what then? Dave's alive and stuffing people into springlock suits and killing them? mean, he did it before. If I could just go back to the restaurant one more time and make sure that Charlie stops somewhere, suddenly aware of the growing anger in John's face. To make sure of what? He asked sternly. Nothing. Clay has it under control. Everything is best left with the police. She clenched her jaw, gazing out over the horizon. Jessica will go with me. What makes you think Jessica will? Right. John said with a surprised look. Right. You're right. Charlie nodded with forced enthusiasm. Clay has men for this sort of thing, she continued with a furrowed brow. I'm sure they're on top of it. John took Charlie's shoulders lightly. I'm sure it's not what you think it is anyway, he said in a heartily reassuring tone. There's a lot of crime in this world that doesn't involve self-improving furry bot suits. He laughed, and Charlie forced a smile. Come on, John extended a hand. Charlie took it. I'll walk you to your dorm. I appreciate the gesture, but Jessica's there, and we have to go through the whole reunion, you know. John laughed. Okay, I'll save you. I'll save you from Jessica and her relentless corroborated. Can't read big words. Leave me alone. Charlie grinned. My hero. Where are you staying anyway? That little motel you stayed at last year, actually. I'll see you tomorrow, maybe. Why are you staying at that motel? It was described as the most terrible one ever. Charlie nodded and watched them go, then started on her own way home. Excruciating through the date had been. The last hour felt like a homecoming. It was her and John again. They were familiar again. All we needed was a good old-fashioned murder, she said out loud. And a woman walking her dog gave Charlie an odd look as she passed in the opposite direction. I was at a movie called Zombies vs. Zombies, Charlie called half-heartedly after retreating back. You should go check it out. They don't put mines around the bunker, spoiler alert. Charlie... What? She's going insane. Charlie had, half hoped Jessica would be asleep, but the lights were on when she reached their room. She flung open the door before Charlie had her key out of her pocket, her face flushed. So? Jessica demanded. So what? Charlie asked, grinning in spite of herself. Hey, before you start into this, I need to ask you something. So you know what? Jessica cried, ignoring her question. Tell me about John. How'd it go? Charlie felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Oh, you know, she said casually. Listen, I need you to go somewhere with me in the morning. Charlie, you have to tell me, Jessica moaned exaggeratingly. He flopped back on her bed, then sprang back up into his seating position. Come here and tell me. Charlie sat, drawing her legs up under her. It was weird. I didn't know what to say. Dates just seemed so, uncomfortable, but about what I was saying. But it's John. Shouldn't that outweigh the date part? Well, it didn't, Charlie said. She looked at the floor. She could tell her face was red, and suddenly she wished she hadn't told Jessica anything at all. Jessica put her hands on Charlie's shoulder and then looked at her seriously. You are amazing, and if John isn't falling over himself for you, that's his problem. Charlie giggled. I think he kind of is. It's the part of the problem, but there is something else if you would just listen for a second. Oh, there's more? Jessica laughed. Charlie, you need to save something for the second date, you know? What? No! I need you to go somewhere with me in the morning. Charlie, I have a lot going on right now. I have exams coming up, and I need you. Charlie clenched her jaw for a moment. I need you to help me pick out some new clothes for my next date. What? Why just flat out tell her? Why are you just hiding it? Charlie said carefully, and then waited to see if Jessica would believe her word for it. Charlie, are you kidding me? We'll go first thing in the morning. She jumped up and gave Charlie a giant hug. We'll have a girls' day out, and it will be amazing. Jessica flocked back to her bed. Sleep for now, though. It won't bother you if I work on my project for a while, will it? Not at all. Jessica waved limply, then went still. I'm pretty sure she didn't sleep either. Charlie turned on her work lamp. A single bright beam that focused enough to not illuminate the whole room. She uncovered the faces. They were at rest, their features smooth as if in sleep, but she didn't turn them on yet. The switches that made them move and talk were the only one, were only one part of the whole. Were only one part of the whole. There was another component, the part that made them listen, was always on. Everything that she and Jessica said, every word that was spoken in the room, outside, window, or even the hall, they heard. Each new word went into their databases. Oh, that's weird. Not only as a single word, but all in its configurations as they emerged. Each new piece of information was stuck in a piece of Each new piece of information was stuck to the piece of information most like it. Everything new was built on something old. They were always learning. Charlie turned on the component, and that allowed them to speak. Their features rippled softly as if they were stretching themselves. I know, said the first quickly than the... I know, said the first more quickly than usual. So what, said the second. No, what? You know, so what? No, what? Now what? What now? No, how? Why now? Charlie switches them off, staring as the fan slowed to a stop. That didn't make sense. She looked at her watch, and it was about 3 hours. Late for bed. She changed quickly and climbed under the sheets, leaving the faces uncovered. There was something unnerving about their exchange. It was faster than it had been, and it was nonsensical. But there was something about that range familiar and struck her. Were you playing a game? She asked. They couldn't answer. They just stared blankly into each other's eyes. Like her and her brother used to play, huh? Oh, snap! Alright, here's chapter 4, guys. It's getting spicy. Now, she did say her brother her and her brother, said stuff that didn't mean anything, but meant something to them. They played this little game that they would say something stupid, but it would mean something to them. So, for her to feel familiar about this little... For her to feel like a wave of nostalgia for the nonsense they were talking, it makes sense for her to feel like... She removed the pillowcase gently, taking care not to let it catch on anything. Beneath their shroud, the faces, blank and sightless, were placed. They looked like they could wait, ever listening for eternity. Charlie switched them on and bent over to watch as they begun to move their plastic mouths without sound, practicing. Where, said the first. Here, said the second. Where, said the first again. Charlie drew back. Something was wrong with the voice. It sounded strained. Here, repeated the second. Where, said the first with rising intonation, like it was growing upset. That's not supposed to happen, Charlie thought, alarmed. They weren't supposed to modulate their voices. Where, the first wailed, and Charlie stepped back. She leaned down slowly to peer under the desk as though she might find an entanglement of the wires that would explain the strange behavior. As she stared, puzzled, a baby began to cry. She stood at once, knocking her head painfully on the edge of the desk. The two faces looked suddenly more human and more childlike. One was crying and the other one was watching with an astonished look on his face. It's okay, said the calmer face. Don't leave me. The other wailed as if to turn it to look at Charlie. I'm not going to leave you, Charlie cried. Everything will be okay. The sound of the crying swelled, higher and louder than the human voices should be. Charlie covered her ears, looking desperately around for someone to help. Her bedroom had darkened, and heavy things hung from the ceiling. Matted fur brushed her face. Oh, back in the closet. Oh, Christ. Matted fur brushed her face, and her heart jolted. The children are not safe. She turned back, but an arch of fabric and fur had somehow fallen between her and the wailing of babies. I'll find you, she shoved her face through, tripping on limbs that dragged on the ground. The costumes swung wildly like trees in a storm. A little distance away, something fell on the floor with a hard clunk. At last, she reached her desk, but they were gone. The howling went on and on and on. So, Charlie couldn't hear herself think, even as she realized that she was screaming on her own. Charlie sat up with a loud, raw gasp, as if she had actually been screaming. Charlie? It was John's voice. Charlie looked around with one bleary eye to see a head peering through the bedroom door. Give me a minute, Charlie called as she sat up straight. Get out, she cried, and John... And John's head shrank back. The door closed. She felt shaky, her muscles weak. She had been holding them tense in her sleep. She had changed quickly into clean clothes and tried to brush her slightly tangled hair into something more manageable, then opened the door. John poked his head in again, taking a cautious look around. Okay, come in. It's not booby-trapped, though it may be, Charlie joked. How'd you get in here? Well, it was open, and I followed you in while you were asleep. I mean, what? John trailed off as if he took in the room around him, momentarily distracted by the mess. I thought maybe we could go to breakfast. I have work across town in 40 minutes, but I have time. Oh, what a nice thought, but sorry for the mess, it's my project. I sort of get wrapped up in it and forget to clean. She glanced at her desk. The pillowcase was in a place that, as it should be. The vague outlines of faces just visible beneath it. It was just a dream. And John shrugged. Yeah, what's the project? Language, sort of. She looked around the room curiously. Where had Jessica wandered off to? Charlie knew John would be suspicious of her sudden, unprecedented interest in clothes shopping, and was hoping to avoid explanations. Natural language programming, she went on. I'm taking computer programming class. At the last moment, something stopped her from saying the word robotics. John nodded. He was still eyeing the mess, and Charlie could not tell what had caught his attention. She plunged back into her explanation. So I'm working on teaching spoken language to computers. She walked briskly toward the door and peered out the hall. Don't computers already know language? John called. Well, yeah, she said as she returned to the room. She looked at John. His face changed, stripped down to something more adult, but she could still see him as he'd been the year before, captivated as he watched her old mechanical toys. I can tell him. But then, a look of alarm crossed John's face. He surged forward to the bed, stopping a few inches from it. He pointed. Is that Theodore's head? He asked carefully. Yeah, Charlie said. She walked to the windows and peered through the blinds, trying to spot Jessica's car. So you have been to the house? Yeah, I went back once, she confessed, to get him. She looked at John guiltily. He shook his head. Charlie, you don't have to explain yourself. It's your house. He grabbed the chair from her desk and sat down. Why'd you take him apart? She studied his face worriedly, wondering if he was already asking himself the next obvious question. What if it runs in the family? Eek. I wanted to see how he worked, Charlie said. She spoke carefully, feeling like she had to appear as rational as possible. I would have taken Stanley and Ella too, but, they were bolted to the floor. Pretty much, yeah, so I took Theodore. Okay, there we go. I'm actually using some of his components in my project. Charlie looked down at the disembodied bunny's head, into his blank glassy eyes, took him apart, using his component parts. That sounds rational. She had gotten Theodore from her father's house, and just before school began, Jessica hadn't been home. It was early evening, not quite dark, and Charlie had smuggled Theodore inside of her backpack. She took him out and set him on the bed and pressed the button to make him talk. As before, there was nothing but a strangled sound. Oh, lie. The scrambled decay traces of her father's voice. Charlie had felt a pang of anger at herself for even trying. You sound pretty awful, she said harshly to Theodore, who looked up at her blankly, immune to the reprimand. Charlie rifled through her bag of tools and parts, which she hadn't yet taken over to the side of the room. She found her utility knife and went grimly to her bed where the bunny waited. I'll put you back together when I'm done. Right. She looked up at John now, saw the doubt on his face, or maybe it was concern, just like Jessica. Sorry, I know everything's a mess, she said, hearing the edge in her own voice. Maybe I'm a mess too, she added quietly. She set the bunny's head down on her pillow, and a part of his leg beside it. So do you still want to see my project, she asked. Yes, he smiled reassuringly. He followed her to a desk. Charlie hesitated, looking down at the pillowcase. Just a dream. So, she said nervously. Charlie carefully switched everything on before unveiling the faces. Lights began to blink and fans began to whir. She glanced at John again and he took off the cloth. The faces moved in little patterns as if stretching out after waking, though there was little they could stretch. Charlie swallowed nervously. You, me, said the first one, and Charlie heard John make a surprised sound from behind her. Me, said the second. Charlie held her breath, but they fell silent. Sorry, they usually say more, Charlie said. She grabbed the small object from the table and held it up. It was oddly shaped, piece of clear plastic with wiring inside. John frowned for a moment. Is that a hearing aid, he asked. Charlie nodded enthusiastically. It used to be. It's something I'm experimenting with. They listen all the time. They pick up everything that's said around them. But they're just collecting data, not interacting with it. They can only interact with each other. She paused, waiting for a sign that John understood. He nodded. Yeah, he thinks she's crazy. Just like Jessica. He nodded, and she went on. I'm still working out the kinks, but this thing should... Wait, what? But this thing should make the person wearing it visible to them. Not visible, I mean, they can see, but they'll recognize the person wearing the device as one of them. She looked expectantly at John. Why? What does this mean? He asked, seeming to search for words. Charlie closed her hand on the earpiece, frustrated. He doesn't understand. I made them. I want to interact with them, she said. Her expression grew thoughtful, and she looked away, suddenly regretting having to show him the object. Anyway, it's not really finished. She edged to the door and glanced out. It's really cool, John called after her. When Charlie returned from the hallway, he gave her an odd look. Is everything okay? Yes. You should go, though. You'll be late for work. Charlie approached the faces. She looked down thoughtfully at her creations, then sighed and reached for the pillowcase to cover them, as she did. The second face moved. It jerked back on its stand and pivoted, locking its blind eyes on Charlie's. She stared back. It was like looking at a statue. The eyes were only raised bumps in the molded plastic. But Charlie swallowed hard, feeling herself rooted to the spot. She studied the blank gaze until John put a hand on her shoulder. She jumped, startling him as well. They looked down at the earpiece in her hand. Oh, right, Charlie mumbled, and pressed the tiny power button on the side of it. She placed the earpiece carefully on top of the mess in her desk drawer, and then closed the drawer. The face was still for a moment, then slowly turned back to its place. It settled there, locked in a mirrored stare with its double, as if it had been never moved at all. Charlie covered them and switched them off, leaving them only with enough power to listen. At last she looked up at John. Sorry, she said. Does that mean no breakfast? I have plans this morning, Charlie said. Me and Jessica, girl stuff. Really? Girl stuff? You? Yes, girl stuff. Jessica squealed as she entered the room excitedly. Shopping. I finally convinced Charlie it's worth trying on her clothes before she buys them. We might even be able to move past the jean and boots. Are you ready? Ready, Charlie smiled, and John squinted at her. Yeah, he ain't falling for it. Jessica began escorting him out gently out of the door. Right, John said. I'll see you later then, Charlie. Charlie did not respond, but Jessica gave a bright smile as she closed the door behind him. So, Jessica clapped her hands. Where do you want to start today? When they got to the small parking lot of the abandoned mall, it was the afternoon. Charlie, this isn't what I had in mind, Jessica cried as they got out the car. Oh no! Charlie stared at the entrance, but Jessica didn't follow. When Charlie turned, she was leaning against the car with her arms crossed. What are we doing here? Jessica asked, her eyebrows raised. We have to look inside, Charlie said. People's lives might depend on it. I just want to see if there's anything left of Freddy's, then we can go. Whose lives depend on it? And why now? Suddenly, Jessica asked. Charlie looked at her shoes. I just want to see, she said. She felt like a petulant child, but she couldn't bring herself to tell Jessica the whole story. Is this because John is here? She asked suddenly. And Charlie looked up, surprised. What? No. Jessica sighed and uncrossed her arms. It's okay, Charlie, I get it. You haven't seen him since all this happened. And then he shows up again. Of course it brings everything back. Charlie nodded, gratefully latching on to the rationale. It was easier than hiding the truth from her. I doubt there's much left anyway. I just want to walk through and remind myself that it's finally over, Jessica finished. She smiled and Charlie's heart sank. It's really, really not over, she forced a smile. Something like that. Why you keep on lying to her, bro? Charlie walked quietly through the mall. Jessica lagged behind. The place felt like entirely different. The place felt entirely different. Sunlight poured in through the massive gaps in the unfinished walls and the ceiling. Shafts of light sifted between the smaller cracks and splashed against the concrete slabs. Charlie could see moths, maybe butterflies, hovering at the windows, and as they passed through the empty halls on their way to Freddy's, she could hear the birds chirping. The deathly quiet she remembered, the overpowering sense of dread was gone, yet Charlie thought she was... Charlie thought as she glanced at the half-constructed storefronts, it still felt haunted, maybe even more than before. It was because of a different kind of haunting, not frightening. But Charlie had a sense that something was present, like stepping onto a hollowed ground. "Hello," Charlie said softly, not sure whom she was addressing. "Do you hear something?" Jessica slowed her pace. "No, it feels smaller." Charlie gestured at the open mouths of the never-opened department stores and the end of the hall ahead of them. It seemed so intimidating the last time. It actually seems kind of peaceful. Jessica spun in place, enjoying the air from the outside, which was flowing freely through the empty spaces. Jessica followed Charlie through the doorway, and then they stopped dead, blinded by the sunlight. Freddy's had been torn apart. Some of the walls stood. The far end looked almost intact, but in front of her was a field of debris. Old bricks, broken tiles, and strewn from the dirt. In the dirt. The two of them stood now on a slab of concrete that lay baking in the sun. The passage inward along with the entire side wall of the restaurant was gone. The walls and the ceiling were just a line of rubble against the trees. The concrete walkway was still there, worn dark by years of dank and leaking pipes. "So much for Freddy's," Jessica said in a hushed voice, and Charlie nodded. They made their way through the debris. Charlie could make out where the main dining room had been, but everything was gone. The tables and chairs, checkered cloths, and the party hats had all been removed because they had been sent to a different location, and Clay doesn't want Charlie to get mad at this. That's probably why he didn't tell her. The tables and chairs... I'm sorry, what? The tables and chairs, the checkered cloths, party hats have been removed. The merry-go-round had been ripped out, leaving nothing but a hole in the floor. Some stray wires, the stage itself had been assaulted though not removed. They must have been in the middle of that when the job was stopped. Boards were torn up across the main stage area, and left-hand set of the stairs were gone. What was left of the wall behind the stage broke off at the top, like jagged mountains along the sky. "Are you okay?" Jessica looked at Charlie. "Yeah, it's not what I expected, but I'm okay." She thought for a moment. "I want to see what's still there." Charlie gestured to the stage, and they crossed what was left of the dining area. The floorboards cracked, the linoleum torn. Jessica peered under a pile of rock where the arcade machines had been. The consoles that stood like dusty gravestones. The consoles that had stood like dusty gravestones were gone, but they could see the outlines of each one. Square patches remained where they had been torn from their posts. Stray wires huddled in small piles in the corners. Charlie turned her attention back to the main stage. She climbed up to where the animatronic animals had once performed. "Careful!" Jessica cried. Charlie nodded in absent acknowledgement. She stood to one side, remembering the layout. This is where Freddy stood. The boards were turned up in front of her, and in two more places. The destruction here was where they had taken out the pivoting plates that bolted the mascots to the stage. Not that they stayed bolted for very long, Charlie thought wryly. She could see it now. if she closed her eyes. The animals were going through their program motions faster and faster until it was clear they were out of control, moving wildly as if they were afraid. They were walking out of their stands, and then the awful sound of cracking wood was cracking wood as Bonnie lifted his bolted foot and tore himself free of the stage. Charlie shook her head, trying to rid herself of the image. She made her way to the back of the stage. The lights were all gone, but the skeleton exposed beams crisscrossed the open sky where the lights had been. Jessica, she called. Where are you? Down here. She followed the sound of the girl's voice. Jessica was crouched in place where the control room had been, peering into the gap of the stage. Nothing? Charlie asked, not sure about the answer she hoped for. It's been gutted. No monitors, nothing. Charlie climbed down beside her, and they peered in together. This is where we were trapped last time, Jessica said quietly. Me and John, there was something at the door, and the lock caught. I thought we were going to be stuck in that little room, and she looked at Charlie, who simply nodded. The horrors of that night were unique to each of them. The moments that beset them in their sleep, or as sailed in their thoughts without warning in the middle of the day, were private. Come on, Charlie said abruptly, heading again toward the Mount Rebel where the more games had been. Charlie crouched under a large slab that had leaned to the side and acted as a doorway to what was left to the place. This place seems dangerous. Jessica tiptoed over the loose rock. The floor was still covered in carpet in most places, and Charlie could see the deep grooves where the arcade machine had been. She hurled herself at the console, and somehow it was enough. It wobbled on its base, then fell, knocking Foxy to the ground and pinning him there. She ran, but he was too quick. He caught her by the leg and ripped the hook straight through her. She screamed, staring down at the snapping, twisted metal jaws and the burning silver eyes. Oh yeah, little excerpt from the book. She heard a noise, almost a whimper, and realized it was her. She clapped her hands over her mouth. I thought we were all going to die, Jessica whispered. Me too, Charlie said. They looked at each other for a moment, an eerie stillness settling over the sunlit wreckage. Hey, this place is probably going to fall on us soon, so Jessica broke the silence, gesturing toward the slabs of concrete surrounding them. Charlie crawled back out the way they came and stood up. The way they'd come and stood up. Her knees were crawling with pins and needles. She rubbed them and stomped the ground. I want to check the costume room, see if there's anything left. Charlie left without expression. Or Charlie said without expression. You mean to see if there's anybody left? Jessica shook her head. I have to know. Charlie gave her jeans a final brush and started off toward it. The room was... Sorry. I have to know. Charlie gave her jeans a final brush and started toward it. The room stuck out of the middle, alone and intact. It was the place where the costumes had been kept, and where Carlton had been held prisoner. Charlie cautiously poked her head inside, studying the physical details around her. The chipped paint on the wall, the carpet that someone had begun to tear up but left unfinished. Don't think about last time. Don't think about what happened here. She let her eyes adjust for a moment longer when they went inside. The room was empty. They did a cursory search. Cursory search. But everything had been removed. There was nothing left but walls, floor, and ceiling. Yeah, of course. Clay did say that they got rid of everything, Charlie said. Jessica gave her a sharp look. Clay? When? He was going to, I mean. Hastily covering the slip. Last year. They took a final look around as they were leaving. Charlie spotted a glint of light from something in the corner. It was a plastic eyeball of some unknown animatronic mascot. Charlie was about to go to it, but stopped there. There's nothing here, she said. Not waiting for Jessica, she headed back through the debris, looking down at her feet as she stepped over the bricks and stones and shattered glass. Hey, wait, Jessica called after her hastily. Pirate's Cove, Charlie, look! Charlie stopped. She watched Jessica as she climbed over a steel beam and stepped carefully over the remains of the fallen wall. In front of her, a curtain lay strewn across what appeared to be a pile of rubble. Charlie followed her, and when she caught up, she could see that the curtain concealed a gap in the ruins. The top of the few glittering chairs peeked out from the stones. A row of broken stage lights lay across the top of the curtain as though holding it in place. It looks pretty good compared to the rest of the place. Charlie didn't answer. There was a dirty poster lying flat on the ground, depicting Depicting a cartoonist Foxy delivering pizzas to happy children. Jesus. Jessica, look. Charlie pointed to the ground. Those look like claw marks. After a moment, Jessica said after a moment. There were long scratches and scrapes running the length of the floor, and dark marks that looked like traces of blood. It looked like someone was being dragged. Jessica stood and followed the scratches. They led behind the curtain away from the area where Pirates Cove once stood. The stage, Jessica said. When they moved the curtain aside, they found the stage had a small hatch at the back. Storage, Charlie murmured. She pulled on it, but the hatch wouldn't open. There has to be a hatch somewhere, Jessica said. She cleared away the dirt and the broken wood from the base of the stage, uncovering a deadbolt that went into the floor. She pulled it up, releasing the door, which swung open like something was pushing against it. A face lurched out of the darkness, two gaping eyes swinging forward. Jessica screamed and fell backward. Charlie recoiled. The masked face hung lifelessly from the rotted fur costume. An entire mascot suit was inside, crammed into a space much too small for it. Charlie stopped, her whole body numb with shock as she stared at the thing with dread, as almost as old as she was. The yellow rabbit, she whispered. Oh, snap. It's Dave. Jessica gasped. Charlie took a deep breath, forcing herself back to the present. Come on, help me, she said. She stepped forward and grabbed at the fabric, pulling on whatever she could reach. You're kidding! I'm not touching that thing. Jessica, get over here, Charlie commanded, and Jessica caved reluctantly over. Ew, ew, ew! Jessica touched the suit and recoiled. She gave Charlie a flat look and tried again, yanking her hands away as soon as she touched it. Ew! She repeated it quietly. Then finally screwed her eyes shut and took hold of it. Together they pulled. Nothing happened. I think it's stuck, Jessica said. They shifted positions until they finally heaved the mascot out of its cramped space. The fabric caught on stray nails and jagged wood. But Charlie kept pulling. At last the creature was out, splayed heavily on the ground. I definitely don't think Dave faked his own death, Charlie said. But what if it's not him? Jessica peered carefully into the face. It's him. Charlie looked at the dried blood soaked into the mascot's fingertips. The spring locks might have not killed him right away, but this is where he died. They could see Dave's body through the gaps in the costume, and he's gonna wake up! And the wide carved eyes of the mascot had showed through to his face. His skin was desiccated and shriveled. His eyes were wide open, his face expressionless and discolored. Charlie moved closer again. Her initial shock had passed, and now she was curious to see more of him. Oh, God. She probed carefully at first, in case of some of the spring locks inside might be waiting to snap. But it was clear that they had already done their damage. The locks had been driven so deeply into his skin that the bases of each were flush against his neck. They looked like a part of him. Charlie studied the chest of the costume. They were large tears in the yellow fabric, which had gone green and pink with mold and patches. They grabbed hold of the sides and pulled. We're getting like a little inside Death of Springtrap here. I just noticed that. She grabbed hold of the sides and pulled the gap open as wide as she could. Jessica watched fascinated, her hand over her mouth. Skewers of metal protruded through his entire body, dull encrusted with his blood, and there were more complex parts. Twisted knots of gore with many layers of machinery. Oh snap! This is the end. With many layers of machinery stuck out from his body. The suit's fabric was stiff with blood, too. Yet the man didn't seem to have rotted, despite the years that had passed. It's like he's fused with the suit. Uh-oh. Little did they know! It's like he's fused to the suit, Charlie said. She tugged at the mascot head, trying to pull it off, but gave up quickly. The gaping eyes stared up at her, behind which was the dead man's face. With the light directly on him, Dave's skin appeared sickly and discolored. Charlie felt a sudden rush of nausea. She pulled back from the corpse and looked up at Jessica. "So now what?" Jessica said. "Did you want to give him a foot massage too?" She turned her head abruptly, gagging at her own joke. "Listen, I have class in about an hour. Do you still want to do some shopping?" "Why can't I have normal friends?" Jessica groaned. Alright, guys. So, yeah, we can read the first 3 pages. We are learning all the time, hopefully. Nah, I'll leave it for another video. I need to rest my voice for right now. Anyway, guys, so yeah, that was chapter 3 and 4 of the Twisted Ones. So yeah, guys, if you guys want more Twisted Ones, make sure you guys hit the like button, comment below, subscribe for more Come Kiss today. Peace out.